Okay, so let me just give you a warning right now that you're probably going to agree and disagree with some of the points in this video. Stick around for a second because we need to have this conversation. First, I'd like to call for some compassion for former Sheriff's Deputy Scot Peterson, who was the school resource officer at Stoneman Douglas High School who didn't enter the active shooter situation. Let's step into his shoes for just a second. So, you're the school resource officer. You may or may not have a vest, which really is jelly because a vest isn't going to stop an AR-15 round, and you have a sidearm, which really isn't very accurate. So, there's a pause in your thought process because if you're outgunned, you're supposed to ask for backup and wait until that backup arrives. And he is the lone officer on the scene at the point that shots are being fired inside the building. Second, let's look at it from a tactical standpoint. If he enters that building, he's going to be walking down narrow hallways that are long and have no cover. And so if the gunman comes out from around a corner, he's done. That's it. His resource that he is providing as a support mechanism for the rest of the officers that are coming is no longer active. It's no longer viable because he is down in a pool of blood and going to bleed out. So let's talk about next. He's entering a situation that he's not sure whether there's one shooter or two shooters, how many guns that he's up against, and the fact is that he is going in probably to shoot a kid. Okay, which is probably also going to give him pause. I don't care who you are and what arguments you want to make that, oh, he's 19 years old. If you think a 19-year-old who enters a building with an AR-15 because of some high school bullshit isn't a kid, you're wrong. He's going in to shoot a kid. And if you have no reservations about shooting a kid, there's something broken within you, okay? Remember that Mark Wahlberg movie about the SEALs who got wiped out and there was only the lone survivor because they didn't shoot the kids? That's what heroes do. They don't shoot kids. They sacrifice themselves to not shoot kids. Now, there could be some argument about, whether or not he goes in to sacrifice himself to take the shooter out and potentially gets him, yada, 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 because the shooter's shooting other kids. But the problem is that the limbic system's firing and his prefrontal cortex is shut down and he can't think about that at the moment because the adrenaline is running so hard in his body that he is shaking. So let's provide some compassion for the guy who had pause of entering an active shooter situation with a whole lot of uncertainty. Second, Mr. LaPierre, and again, compassion to Scot Peterson, your good guy with a gun theory didn't work out so well this time. So let's talk about what we do when a kid picks up a stick at the playground and starts hitting another kid with a stick. Do we give the teacher a stick so that next time they can start hitting the kid who's hitting the kid with the stick? Or do we take away the stick and not allow them to have the stick? And let's not have an argument about whether or not 18, 19, and 20-year-olds should have AR-15s. They shouldn't. First of all, they don't vote. Second of all, they don't give to your political campaign. Third of all, they don't give to the NRAs who can then give to the political campaign. You're not going to get a whole lot of pushback in making a law that says you have to be 21 to buy a semi-automatic rifle, just like you have to be 21 to buy a sidearm, because that's the current law in the United States. Lastly, let's talk about potentially banning semi-automatic rifles, period. Because guess what? The argument against, and I'm coming at this from a very deeply connected root of this argument, because my fifth great-grandfather was the man who manufactured the muskets for the colonial militia that fired the shot heard around the world and is the reason that Washington was able to wrest this country away from the British and kick them to the curb because we had superior munitions. He was the man who built those muskets, so I completely understand the need to have a well-regulated militia, quote-unquote, that can rise up against an oppressive government, okay? But here's the problem with that. Technology. Because you want to have the right to fire your AR-15 as an enthusiast or pretend that you're going to go out shooting deer with an AR-15, but the real reason, the real argument is we want to have our AR-15s to push back against an oppressive government. The problem is, until you're able to push back and get completely remote-controlled drones with satellite control and those cool Lockheed Hellfire missiles, you're done with your AR-15 resistance. Your little compound in the middle of Tennessee or Kentucky or Arkansas or Texas or wherever you are, Utah, Idaho doesn't fucking matter anymore because you're not going to get a single round off before you go boom when the oppressive government decides they don't want any more resistance. So your argument about having those semi-automatic weapons, or those automatic weapons, or those weapons of mass destruction that our kids can then get their hands on and create a mass shooting incident in these schools is moot. It doesn't freaking matter. If you want to change your government, you got to change it from the inside now, because the technology that the government has to be able to crush you and your AR-15s and make them melt as before you even are able to pull the trigger already exists. So let's have a rational discussion. Let's have a real discussion about how we can keep unstable kids. And yes, it is a both firearms and mental health issue discussion, not an either or. Let's have a rational discussion about how we can limit the capability for a young mind that's just simply unstable because it's young to be able to get its hands on these weapons and take a personal slight into killing multiple kids because they're angry at the world. Thank you for your time. Discuss as necessary.